Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? She stood there silent in her crisp new scrubs. To them she was just another rookie, young, ordinary, forgettable. But that was the point, wasn't it? Sarah Martinez let the charge nurse's words wash over her, instructions, policies, a dozen rules meant to remind her she was at the very bottom of the ladder. She nodded politely, spoke only when spoken to, and never let her calm expression slip. The others sized her up with sideways glances. They had already decided she wouldn't last. No one knew what sat heavy beneath her skin, or why the word rookie stung less than it should. No one saw the way her hands moved, steady, practiced, controlled. Too steady for someone fresh out of school. She carried her lunch in a plain brown bag. She sat alone, just as she had planned. She studied patient charts instead of joining in gossip about doctors or shift schedules. And she listened, always listened. The hospital was its own battlefield. The beeping monitors, the constant alarms, the air thick with exhaustion and the faint odor of antiseptic that no one ever really got used to. Most new nurses panicked at the first sign of crisis. Not her, not Sarah. Still, when Mrs. Chen clutched her hand, whispering she was scared her heart might stop again, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected, a thread of recognition. She pulled a chair close and spoke softly, grounding the woman with warmth in her voice. She didn't rush. She didn't overpromise. She just stayed present. 10 minutes passed. The patient's panic eased. Fear gave way to calm. From the doorway, Maria, a veteran nurse hardened by 15 years of long nights and too many losses, paused. She'd seen rookies crumble, or worse, posture with arrogance. But this girl knew something, something deeper. By mid-afternoon, whispers started, not loud enough to reach Sarah but noticeable. Too calm for her first day. Did you see how she handled that arrhythmia alarm? She acts like she's done this before. And maybe she had. When alarms blared in room 314, Sarah was first through the door. Mr. Rodriguez's heart rhythms danced erratically across the monitor. Doctors hadn't even arrived yet, but Sarah's hands were already moving, oxygen, monitoring leads, calm reassurance whispered to a man fighting for his life. She didn't hesitate. She didn't tremble. She just acted. How did you know to do that? Another nurse asked later, suspicion lacing her tone. I've seen it before, Sarah replied evenly, but she left it at that. No one pressed her, not then. But in quiet moments, the weight of pretending pressed down on her shoulders. To them, she was just another nurse finding her footing. To her patients, she was a calm anchor in chaos. And yet, she knew what they didn't. The steady hands, the instinct to read patterns of breath and pulse, those weren't gifts from nursing school. They were scars, scars she wore on the inside. The day ended like it began. She walked alone across the parking lot, the sun setting low, shadows stretching across the asphalt. No one waved goodbye. No one asked how her first day went, and maybe she preferred it that way. She sat in her car, letting silence settle around her. Her fingers brushed the badge hanging from her neck. St. Mary's Medical Center, a fresh start, a different kind of service. At least that was the plan. But some plans don't survive contact with reality. 3 weeks later, chaos cracked through her careful disguise. The ambulance bay doors slammed open. A soldier barely more than a boy was rushed in, uniform torn, blood blooming across his chest, paramedics shouting vitals, monitors screeching. His dog tags clinked as they cut away the rest of his gear. Sarah froze for half a second, then forced herself to move. Not toward him. She couldn't. Not yet. Martinez, room 318. Mrs. Patterson's asking for you. Maria's voice pulled her away, tugging her into routine duty. But her eyes betrayed her, flicking once more toward the stretcher. She saw his hand twitch toward his chest pocket as though reaching for something invisible. The recognition hit her like a punch. She had seen that motion before, too many times. She turned her back, slipping into Mrs. Patterson's room with her practiced calm. But the old woman saw through her, the way only the elderly sometimes can. "You've seen things," Mrs. Patterson whispered, her voice trembling with both frailty and wisdom. "Too young for that look in your eyes." Sarah smiled faintly, deflecting, but the words lingered, clinging like smoke. When she returned to the trauma bay, the soldier was still alive. Barely. His voice cracked as he tried to argue with Dr. Williams. "I need to get back to my unit. My guys, they're waiting for me." "You nearly died today," the doctor snapped. "You're not going anywhere." Sarah stepped forward, assigned to his care. Their eyes met. Recognition sparked, though they had never seen each other before. He looked at her the way soldiers look at each other, a look heavy with shared understanding, unspoken and undeniable. "What's your name, soldier?" she asked softly. "Corporal Jake Thompson, 101st Airborne." His voice carried a respect she hadn't heard in a long time, respect reserved for someone who understood, someone who'd been there. "You're safe now, Corporal. Rest. That's your mission for today." And yet, as she adjusted his blanket, his gaze never left her face. Searching, questioning, maybe even knowing. That night she sat in her car again, but instead of silence there were memories, the smell of dust and iron, the high-pitched ring of an explosion, the unbearable weight of someone's blood warm on her gloves. 5 times she had been pulled from the battlefield, broken, stitched back together and sent back in. 5 times. 5 purple ribbons hidden in a box, hidden from everyone here. They thought she was a rookie. They thought she was fragile, new, untested. But she remembered what it meant to hold someone's life in your hands when the world was burning around you. And she remembered the unbearable silence when not everyone made it back. She leaned her head against the steering wheel, breathing deep, grounding herself against the flood of memory. Tomorrow she would wake up, put on her scrubs, and play her part again. A nurse. Just a nurse. That's all anyone needed to know. But deep inside, Sarah Martinez knew the truth. There was no such thing as just when it came to healing. Not in war, not here, not anywhere. And sooner or later, someone would find out who she really was. Why did he look at her that way? Every time Sarah entered his room, Corporal Jake Thompson's eyes followed her with an intensity that unsettled her. Not suspicion exactly, not admiration either. Something more complicated. Recognition, maybe. She tried to hide behind routine, checking IV lines, charting vitals, encouraging him to eat. But his gaze cut through all of it. Other nurses treated him like a fragile soldier far from the battlefield. She spoke to him like a man who had already been through hell, because she knew he had, and she knew how it felt. Nightmares clawed at him. Anxiety attacks jolted him awake. Some staff whispered about psych consults. Sarah didn't. Instead, she pulled a chair beside his bed, steady and unhurried, guiding him through controlled breathing. Calm, measured words, a steady hand on his wrist, the same way she had steadied young men bleeding in the dust of faraway deserts. "How do you know how to do this?" Jake asked one night, his voice raw from lack of sleep. She smiled faintly. "Some things you just learn." But that wasn't enough for him. He tilted his head, studying her like he was trying to solve a riddle. "You talk like you've been there, deployed. I can tell. You know about coming back." She paused, a beat too long, then she deflected. "Coming back isn't always the hardest part. Sometimes it's the in-between, not quite there, not quite home." His lips parted slightly, surprise flickering across his face. "That's exactly it. That's what it feels like." He stopped himself, blinking hard, as though afraid if he asked again she might shut down completely. Sarah changed the subject. She spoke of Mrs. Patterson and her worries about old students, of Mr. Rodriguez and his granddaughter's photos. She spun stories of other patients, gentle distractions that reminded him of normal life, of things beyond nightmares and gunfire. Slowly, his breathing evened. He ate again. He laughed just once, but it was something. From the doorway, Maria and Jennifer watched. "She's got him wrapped around her finger," Jennifer whispered. "No," Maria corrected softly. "She's keeping him alive." And they were both right. But secrets don't stay buried forever. One afternoon, the hospital descended into chaos. A multi-car accident flooded the ER with casualties. Every hand was needed. Sarah was pulled into the trauma bay, adrenaline humming through her veins the moment she smelled blood and heard the frantic shouts. She didn't falter. She didn't hesitate. She moved like a woman possessed by instinct, reading vitals before monitors even caught up, anticipating instruments before doctors asked, starting IVs, stabilizing airways, calling out observations with crisp clarity. Dr. Williams barked orders, but his eyes kept flicking toward her. He'd seen dozens of rookies crumble in their first trauma surge, but this one, she looked like she'd been doing it her entire life. Martinez, severe chest trauma, Bay 3. She pivoted. A middle-aged man, crushed ribs, breath shallow, BP falling fast. She didn't wait for instructions. Her eyes swept his chest. Uneven rise, hollow sound with each desperate gasp, oxygen dropping like a stone. Tension pneumothorax, she called, already prepping the decompression kit. Dr. Williams snapped his head up. She was right, deadly right. He joined her, but she had already lined everything up, steady hands moving without hesitation. Seconds later, the man's chest eased, his vitals stabilizing by the inch. Afterward, Williams cornered her in the hallway. His voice was low, guarded. "Where did you learn to recognize that so fast?" "I've seen it before," she answered carefully. "That's not nursing school training," he pressed, his sharp eyes studying her like a puzzle finally starting to make sense. She held his gaze, calm but unyielding. "We all have experiences that shape us, doctor. Mine just happened to look different." And she walked away before he could ask more. But others had noticed. The whispers grew louder now, circling around her like restless birds. She was too skilled, too composed, too something. And Jake, he noticed most of all. Later that evening, he sat in the lounge, staring at a muted TV replaying the accident footage. Sarah walked in, tired but steady. He turned to her, voice quiet. "I saw you down there, the way you moved. That wasn't just training, that was muscle memory." She froze, her throat tightening. "You've been where I've been," he said softly, "haven't you?" Sarah sank into the chair across from him, exhaling slowly. "We all have our battles." "That's not an answer," he pressed gently. "And you don't have to give me one, but I see you, really see you." She looked away, her hands tightening in her lap. Secrets she had locked away for years clawed at the surface. But the time wasn't right. Not yet. Instead, she asked, "How are the nightmares?" "Better," Jake admitted. "Because of you." He paused, studying her face with quiet intensity. "You let me feel what I need to feel without pretending it's okay. That's rare." She nodded faintly. Healing isn't about pretending. It's about finding ways to live with the weight and move forward. He swallowed hard. "Is that what you did?" She met his gaze. "It's what I'm still doing." And in that moment, the silence between them said more than words ever could. But silence has a way of breaking. 2 weeks later, Dr. Williams sat in his office, scrolling through emails. A routine background verification request from the Department of Veterans Affairs popped onto his screen. He nearly dismissed it, until he saw the name. Sarah E. Martinez. He read the details twice, then again. Former combat medic. 5 tour across Afghanistan and Iraq. Commendations for valor, 3 bronze stars, a silver star, and 5 purple hearts. He sat back, stunned, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The calm under fire, the clinical precision, the way she connected with Jake in ways no one else could. 5 purple hearts. He stared at the words, the weight of them settling over him like a shroud. He had taught medicine for decades. He knew what a single purple heart meant, and she had 5. He picked up the phone, his voice tight with both awe and caution. "Yes, HR, this is Dr. Williams. I'll handle the verification personally. And listen to me carefully, any future inquiries about Nurse Martinez, they stay confidential. Do you understand? No rumors, no leaks. But it was too late for that. Hospitals have ears, and whispers travel faster than truth. By the end of the week, Sarah could feel it. The way staff eyes lingered, the subtle shifts in tone. Some patients looked at her with newfound trust, others with a hesitation she hated. And among colleagues, the air was different, respect laced with distance, admiration tangled with unease. She wanted to vanish, to melt back into anonymity, but Jake's words echoed in her mind. You helped me see my service gave me strength, not just scars. Maybe it's time you saw that about yourself too. That night Sarah sat alone in her car again, 5 medals hidden in a box at home, 5 scars etched into her memory. She had wanted to be invisible, just another rookie nurse, but the truth was out now, at least in pieces. And the question gnawed at her. Would her past define her future, or would she finally own it? Because the truth had a way of surfacing, and when it did, there would be no going back. Why did silence feel heavier than words? Sarah could feel it the moment she walked into the unit. The subtle hush when conversation stopped, the lingering stares, the respectful nods from some, the uncertain distance from others. Word had spread. Despite Dr. Williams's promise of confidentiality, hospitals had a way of pulling secrets from shadows. And now the quiet young nurse, once dismissed as a rookie, had become something else entirely. A decorated veteran, a soldier who wore 5 Purple Hearts. She tried to ignore it. She charted as usual. She listened to her patients with the same gentle steadiness. She answered doctors with calm professionalism. But the weight of awareness pressed on her shoulders, heavier with each passing hour. Veteran patients asked for her by name now. Some looked at her with tears in their eyes, others with an unspoken relief, the kind that comes from being cared for by someone who understood without explanation. Her colleagues weren't so simple. Jennifer hovered around her more than before, polite but awkward, as though afraid of saying the wrong thing. Maria treated her with quiet respect, but questions flickered in her eyes, questions she never voiced. Some younger nurses looked at her almost like a myth, whispering in break rooms, wondering how someone so soft-spoken could carry so much history. And then there were the ones who avoided her altogether, not out of cruelty but out of something worse, intimidation. Sarah hated it. She hadn't come here for recognition. She hadn't come here to be saluted in hallways or treated like a fragile relic. She had come here to start over, to heal others quietly without dragging her past into every room. But the past had a way of bleeding through the bandages. Jake saw it too. When he caught her in the cafeteria, sitting alone with her untouched sandwich, he didn't ask for permission this time. He simply sat down. I heard, he said softly. Her chest tightened. She didn't look at him. Hospitals talk too much. Are you okay with it? I don't know, she admitted. Her voice was quiet, but there was a sharp edge beneath it. I wanted to be seen as a nurse, not a veteran, not a headline. He studied her, his face thoughtful. When I got home, I didn't want anyone to know I'd served. Thought it would define me. Thought it would make me smaller somehow. But you taught me it was something to be proud of. So why's it different for you? Because I'm not you, she said quickly, sharper than intended. The words hung in the air, bitter. She lowered her voice. Because I wanted to bury it, to pretend I could live without carrying that weight every day. Has that worked? He asked gently. She let out a humorless laugh. Not really. He leaned forward, his tone steady. Maybe that's because it's not something you bury. Maybe it's something you integrate. I mean, you've been teaching me that every day. Why can't you believe it for yourself? Her throat tightened. She had no answer, not yet. The next call came before she could dwell too long. An accident downtown, building collapse, multiple casualties inbound. Sarah, Dr. Williams wants you with the trauma team. The shift changed instantly. Fear, doubt, questions, they all burned away in the white heat of adrenaline. She moved with precision, preparing rooms, checking supplies, grounding herself for the storm about to hit. The first ambulance screeched in. A construction worker 3 stories down, ribs shattered, blood pooling. Sarah was there before the paramedics finished reporting. Her voice was calm, her movements sure. IV in. Airway secured. Vital signs called out without hesitation. BP dropping, someone shouted. Possible internal bleed, Sarah snapped. Her eyes caught a faint, irregular rise in the man's chest. Prep for surgery, now. Her tone carried weight. No hesitation, doctors followed. Another ambulance, another patient, then another. Controlled chaos consumed the trauma bay. Sarah flowed through it like she'd done it 100 times before because she had, just under different skis with different uniforms. She didn't freeze. She didn't doubt. She led. Hours later, when the last patient was stabilized, she stepped into the hall, back against the wall, eyes closed as she drew in deep, controlled breaths. "You okay?" Dr. Williams stood beside her, his expression softer than she'd ever seen. "I'm centering myself," she said evenly. "What I saw in there," he murmured, "that wasn't just nursing. That was battlefield leadership. The way you coordinated, the way you kept the whole team steady, it was extraordinary. I did what needed to be done." He shook his head. "No, you did what few people are capable of." Before she could respond, a code blue alarm split the air. A patient crashing. The same construction worker from earlier. She was running before the words finished echoing. Inside, chaos reigned. Flatlining monitor, doctors shouting. 3 minutes without response to drugs or shocks. The patient was slipping away. "Has anyone checked for tension pneumothorax?" she demanded, scanning the monitor. X-ray was clear an hour ago, a resident shot back. "He's been lying on his side. Air can build slowly. Look at the pattern." Dr. Williams's eyes met hers. He trusted her now. "Do it." Sarah's hands were already moving, decompressing the chest. Seconds later, the heart rhythm snapped back, monitors beeping steady once more. The room fell silent. A man pulled back from death. "How did you know?" the resident asked, awe and confusion mingling. "I've seen it before," she said simply. And for the first time, she didn't flinch at the truth in her words. By nightfall, the whispers were no longer whispers. They were voices. Praise, gratitude, speculation. Staff and patients alike were talking about the rookie nurse who had led a trauma response, who had saved a man others thought lost. But the moment that broke her came later. She returned to the nurse's station, weary, only to find a small group waiting, patients she had cared for, colleagues, and Jake standing with them, his eyes steady on hers. Mrs. Patterson spoke first, her voice trembling with pride. "We heard what you did today. We heard how you saved them, not just today, but every day you've been here. We wanted to thank you." Sarah froze. She hated the attention. But then Jake stepped forward, his voice carrying the words she had feared and needed all at once. "We also heard about your service," he said gently, "about your medals, about your Purple Hearts." Her chest clenched. "We're not surprised," he continued. "From the first day I met you, I knew. You carry yourself like someone who's given everything to others, someone who understands sacrifice, someone who heals because she's lived what others can't imagine." Mrs. Patterson nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. "You gave us hope when we had none. That's what heroes do." Sarah shook her head, her voice breaking. "I'm not a hero. I'm just a nurse doing my job." "No," Dr. Williams's voice cut through as he stepped into the circle. His eyes held both authority and something gentler. "You're a nurse who brings everything she is to her work. Your service, your scars, your courage. It all makes you who you are." Maria stepped forward, voice soft but firm. "We don't need your secrets, Sarah. We just need you, exactly as you are." For the first time since stepping into St. Mary, Sarah felt her walls crack. She looked at the faces around her, patients she had soothed, colleagues she had quietly supported, a young soldier who had seen through her silence. And for once she allowed herself to breathe, to stop pretending to be seen. "Thank you," she whispered, voice trembling but steady, "for letting me be part of your healing." That night she walked the halls differently, not hidden, not invisible, still quiet, yes, but not afraid of being seen. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, and sooner or later the world notices. Why had the elevator stopped on her floor at that exact moment? Sarah looked up from her charts as the doors slid open. A woman stepped out, her uniform crisp, her bearing unmistakable. Military, career officer. Authority radiated from the set of her shoulders and the sharp click of her polished shoes against the hospital tile. The nurse's station went still, eyes turned, conversations dropped to whispers. The woman scanned the room, then asked, "Sarah Martinez?" Sarah's chest tightened. Her instinct screamed to vanish, to sink back into invisibility. But her name had already been spoken. She stood, every movement careful, controlled. "I'm Colonel Patricia Hayes, Army Medical Command." Her words weren't loud, but they landed like a hammer. Sarah managed a polite nod. "It's just Sarah now. I can help you in a conference room." Behind her, she felt her colleagues' curious stares burning into her back. She didn't flinch. She couldn't. Once the door closed, silence stretched between them. The colonel studied her, eyes sharp, like she was peeling away layers Sarah had worked so hard to build. "You look smaller than your record makes you seem," Hayes said finally, her voice steady but not unkind. "But I suppose combat does that to people, makes them carry things no one else can see." Sarah's throat was dry. "What is this about?" Hayes placed a folder on the table. "Your name came up in some interesting conversations. 5 Purple Hearts, 3 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star, commendations that read like legends. The finest medic some commanders ever served with. You disappeared into civilian life without fanfare, and yet here you are saving lives, leading trauma responses, turning whispers into proof that your service never really ended." Sarah's jaw clenched. She hated the way it sounded, like she was some myth, like her scars were trophies. "I'm not going back," she said firmly. Hayes raised a brow. "I didn't come here to recruit you, not back into combat at least." She leaned forward, voice softening. "I came here because we want to learn from you. We're building something new, a program to help medics transition into civilian health care, to make sure no one with your skill set is ever told their experience doesn't count, and we want you to help us build it." The words hit harder than she expected. She had braced for pressure, for guilt, for a call to serve again. She hadn't braced for this. "You want me to teach others how to leave?" "No," Hayes corrected gently. "We want you to show them how to carry both, how to bridge 2 worlds. You've already done it. We just want to give others a chance to follow." Sarah stared at the folder, the black and white pages inside that detailed her life like bullet points. Tour, injuries, medals, dates, numbers. None of it captured the blood, the dust, the voices that never left her. None of it captured the weight. She shook her head slightly. "I came here to be normal, to leave that behind." Hayes's gaze softened, but her words cut deep. "Has it worked?" Sarah's silence was answer enough. "You don't have to decide today," Hayes said, rising. "Think about it. This isn't about dragging you back. It's about making sure your service evolves instead of ending in a box in your closet." When the colonel left, Sarah sat in the empty conference room, the silence louder than any explosion she'd ever survived. For years she had built her life on the hope of simplicity. A job, patience, healing in quiet ways, but now the past was no longer something she could outrun. It was here, walking hospital halls in polished shoes, offering her a choice she didn't want to make. She carried that weight back to the cardiac floor, her steps slower than usual. Mrs. Patterson spotted her first. The old woman's eyes were sharp as ever. "You look troubled, dear. Did someone give you bad news?" Sarah hesitated, then sat beside her. Maybe not bad, just complicated. Someone asked me to do something bigger than I planned. That's usually how life works, Mrs. Patterson said softly. The things that matter most rarely fit into our plans. Sarah smiled faintly. I wanted a quiet life, a normal life, but maybe that was never really an option. Normal is overrated, the old woman said, squeezing her hand. And besides, do you think all those people you've helped here, do you think they see you as anything less than normal? You're still Sarah, just Sarah. But you're also the sum of everything you've lived. Maybe that's not something to bury, maybe it's something to use. The words echoed long after she left the room. Later that night, Sarah checked in on Jake. He was recovering well, his strength returning. He watched her face carefully, picking up the tension she hadn't hidden well enough. You look like you've been carrying a rucksack all day, he said gently. Sarah exhaled. I had a visitor from the army. His eyes narrowed. Recruitment. No, something different. They want me to help build a bridge program, a way for medics to transition into civilian health care without starting from scratch. Jake blinked. That sounds incredible. Why do you look like it's a bad thing? Because it means I can't keep hiding. It means I'd have to tell my story, live with it, every day. He leaned forward, serious. Sarah, can I tell you something? If someone like you had been there when I first got home, before I was injured, I think things would have been a lot different. I think I would have understood sooner that being wounded didn't make me broken, that my service didn't vanish when I took off the uniform. Her throat tightened. You've helped me more than you know, Jake continued. Not just with medicine, with living. And if you could do that for others, imagine the difference. She looked at him, young, scarred, but fighting, and she saw herself reflected in his words. That night, as she walked through the darkened halls, Sarah knew the truth she had been resisting. She couldn't stay small forever. She couldn't hide behind scrubs and silence and pretend the weight she carried didn't exist. Her past wasn't gone, it was part of her. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop hiding it. Why did her hands shake when she picked up the phone? It was a simple call, just a confirmation, a single decision spoken aloud. Yet Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, the medals still locked in their box on the shelf, staring at the number on the slip of paper Colonel Hayes had left behind. She had spent the night hearing echoes in her head, Mrs. Patterson's gentle wisdom, Jake's steady words, Dr. Williams's voice calling her leadership extraordinary. The voices of the people she'd helped, reminding her she wasn't just a nurse, wasn't just a veteran, wasn't just anything. She was all of it. Still, the fear clung to her ribs like a bruise. If she said yes, it meant stepping out of the shadows. It meant speaking her truth aloud, maybe for the first time in years. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She inhaled, steadying herself the way she had before pushing into firefights, before stepping into trauma bays. Then she pressed. Colonel Hayes, it's Sarah Martinez, I'll do it. There was silence on the other end for a moment, then a quiet warmth. I was hoping you'd say that. The next weeks became a blur of divided focus. By day, Sarah remained Nurse Martinez at St. Mary's, the steady presence patients asked for by name, the calm anchor in the storm of the cardiac floor. But in her off hours, she stepped into a different role, consultant, mentor, architect of something larger than herself. The bridge program, they called it, military to medical, a structured pathway for medics who had patched up brothers-in-arms under fire, only to come home and be told their experience didn't translate. Sarah listened to them, dozens of voices, men and women who had carried wounded comrades through dust and shrapnel, who had stemmed bleeding with torn shirts, who had made life-and-death calls in seconds, only to return and be told they weren't qualified to start IVs in a civilian hospital. Some were bitter, some were broken, some were quietly hopeful, and Sarah saw herself in every single one of them. This is bigger than I realized, she admitted one evening to Dr. Williams, after a long day of meetings followed by a double shift at the hospital. Her shoulders slumped with exhaustion, but her eyes carried a fire. He leaned back in his chair, watching her. "What do you mean?" "There are thousands of us. Medics who came home and got told to start over. People who already saved lives under fire being told they're not ready to save them here. It's not just wrong, it's wasteful. And it's breaking people." Dr. Williams's gaze softened. "And you want to fix it?" "I want to give them what I didn't have," Sarah said. "A way to keep serving, a way to keep healing without hiding." He smiled faintly. "That sounds like the Sarah Martinez I've come to know." But late at night, when she returned home to her silent apartment, the doubts returned. She would sit at her kitchen table with papers spread before her, program drafts, curriculum outlines, testimony notes, and she would hear the voices of old comrades, the ones who hadn't made it home, the ones she had carried but couldn't save. What right did she have to speak for them, to stand in front of others and pretend she had answers? The weight pressed down hardest, the first time she spoke to a room of transitioning medics. They sat in rows, uniforms half shifted, half civilian, some with scars visible, some with invisible ones carved into their eyes. She stood at the podium, her palms damp despite her steady breath. "I was you," she began softly. Her voice trembled just enough to feel honest. "I came home thinking I had to start over, thinking nothing I'd done mattered here, thinking the scars I carried were burdens, not proof that I had given everything I could." The room was silent. "I thought the only way forward was to hide, to pretend I'd never been there, to wear scrubs like armor and hope no one ever looked deeper. But the truth is, you can't bury who you are. You can only learn to carry it differently." A man in the front row, older, his hair peppered gray, shifted, his eyes bright. A younger woman clenched her jaw, blinking fast, and Sarah realized they were listening, really listening. Her voice steadied. "The bridge program exists because you deserve to be seen, because the decisions you made under fire, the lives you saved in impossible moments, those things matter here. They translate. They count. You count." When she finished, the applause was hesitant at first, then stronger. And Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not the hollow pride of medals pinned in ceremonies, not the quiet relief of survival. Something different, something like purpose. Afterward, a young man approached her. His arm was gone below the elbow, the sleeve of his jacket neatly pinned. "Ma'am," he said quietly, his voice breaking, "I thought I was useless now, that I couldn't keep helping, but hearing you," he swallowed hard, "you reminded me I still have something to give." Sarah placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You have more than you realize. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Walking back to her car that night, she felt the familiar ache in her chest, the ache of memory, but this time it was lighter, different, almost hopeful. Back at St. Mary's, the staff adjusted to the new Sarah in their midst. She wasn't invisible anymore, but she wasn't untouchable either. Maria teased her gently about being the famous one. Jennifer still hovered nervously, though her admiration showed through. And Dr. Williams, though he never spoke of it in public, often gave her looks that carried the weight of respect he rarely showed anyone. But the patients remained her compass. Mrs. Kim, who had once wondered what the point of recovery was, smiled now during exercises. Mr. Gonzalez walked down the hall with his granddaughter on his arm. And Jake kept showing up, sometimes for checkups, sometimes just to visit. "You look different these days," he said one afternoon, catching her off guard. "How so?" she asked, adjusting his chart. "Lighter, like you're not carrying it all alone anymore." She froze for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Maybe I'm learning." Jake nodded. "Maybe you're teaching too." Still, at night she wasn't free of the shadows. She would open the box sometimes, running her fingers over the ribbons. 5 medals, each one tied to a wound, a memory, a loss. She hated them. She honored them. She carried them. But now, for the first time, she wondered if she could wear them. Not as trophies, not as scars, but as proof. Proof that surviving didn't mean ending. Proof that even broken people could build bridges. And though she didn't yet know when, Sarah Martinez knew this. The day was coming when she would no longer hide them away. Because sometimes dignity doesn't whisper in the dark. Sometimes it has to step into the light. Why did applause feel louder when it was for her? Sarah stood at the side of the hospital auditorium, watching as the first cohort of the bridge program walked across the small stage to receive their certifications. 12 men and women, 12 medics who had been told their service didn't count. Now they were walking proof that it did. The room was packed. Hospital staff, veterans, families, military officials, and her colleagues from the cardiac unit sitting in the front rows clapping like they had known all along. Colonel Hayes spoke first, her voice clear and commanding. This program is more than a transition. It is a bridge between two worlds, and it began with one person willing to share her story. Please welcome Sarah Martinez. Sarah's chest tightened. She had rehearsed her speech a dozen times. She had written notes. But as she stepped to the podium, staring out at all those expectant faces, she felt the weight of 5 medals pressing against her ribs, even though they were still locked away in her apartment. She gripped the sides of the podium, steadying herself. When I first came to St. Mary, she began softly, her voice carrying in the quiet room, I thought my military service was something I had to leave behind. I thought if anyone knew, they'd see me differently, so I hid it. I tried to be just another nurse. She paused, scanning the audience. Jake sat in the front row, leaning forward, his eyes steady on hers. Mrs. Patterson was there too, beaming with the quiet pride of someone who had always believed in her. But the truth is, you can't hide scars, not forever, and you can't pretend the things that shaped you don't exist. I carried 5 Purple Hearts in a box in my closet for years. I told myself they were reminders of failure, reminders of the times I couldn't do my job without getting hurt, but I was wrong. A ripple went through the room. Those medals didn't mean failure. They meant I chose, again and again, to put others before myself. That even when I broke, I got back up. And when I finally stopped hiding, I realized that my story wasn't about wounds at all. It was about healing. She looked at the 12 new graduates, their faces a mix of pride and disbelief. You're proof that service doesn't end when you take off the uniform. It evolves. You've already saved lives in the hardest places. Now you'll save them here. And maybe, just maybe, you'll remind others that scars don't make you weak. They make you real. The applause swelled. It was thunderous, rising like a wave that broke over her, impossible to stop. Sarah swallowed hard, blinking back the sting in her eyes. Later, in the quiet of the hospital halls, she felt Jake fall into step beside her. You spoke like someone who finally believed her own words, he said. She exhaled. Maybe I'm starting to. Maybe it's time you stop keeping those medals in a box, he said softly. Her steps slowed. She didn't answer, but the thought lingered long into the night. The next weeks blurred with momentum. The bridge initiative gained recognition beyond the hospital. Calls came from other states, other hospitals. Veterans reached out, asking how they could join, how they could help. Sarah found herself traveling more, speaking more. Each time she told her story, it became easier. Not because the memories hurt less, they never did, but because each telling was a stitch in a wound that had once felt too deep to close. Still, the balance was fragile. One night, after a long day split between the hospital and a program meeting, she returned to her apartment, bone-tired. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at the small wooden box she had avoided for years. Her hands trembled as she opened it. 5 medals lay inside, the purple ribbons rich against the worn wood, each one heavy with memory. She lifted the first, tracing the smooth edge with her thumb. It wasn't the medal itself that weighed her down, it was the faces tied to it, the friends she couldn't save, the nights she thought she wouldn't survive. Tears burned her eyes. She pressed the metal to her chest and whispered into the silence, "You mattered. You always mattered." And for the first time, she didn't put it back. The next morning, she pinned all 5 medals inside her lab coat pocket, hidden but with her, close, a private step toward something bigger. At the hospital, life continued. Patients still needed her calm, families still needed her reassurances, and yet the whispers were different now. Not gossip, not speculation, respect. One afternoon, a fellow nurse stopped her in the hall. Jennifer, usually shy around her, fidgeted with her hands before blurting out, "I just wanted to say you make me want to be better, not just as a nurse, as a person." Sarah blinked, surprised. "You already are better than you think." Jennifer's face flushed, but she smiled. And Sarah realized something. Her story wasn't just changing veterans. It was changing everyone who crossed her path. But the true test came unexpectedly. A mass casualty call, downtown explosion, dozens injured. The ER braced for chaos. Sarah slipped into the trauma bay like a soldier stepping back onto familiar ground. The noise, the blood, the alarms, it was all there. But this time she didn't hide the way her body shifted into command. She didn't pretend to be less than she was. "Check vitals, Bay 3, she barked, her voice sharp but calm. "We need blood units ready now. Someone prep intubation in Bay 5. Doctors listened, nurses followed, and Sarah led. Hours later, when the chaos finally slowed, Dr. Williams found her leaning against the wall, sweat streaking her temples, eyes closed in quiet exhaustion. "You didn't just help today," he said. "You commanded it, everyone saw it." She opened her eyes, meeting his steady gaze. "And what do they think?" He gave her a rare smile. "They think you're exactly who we need." That night when she returned home, she didn't hide the medals again. She placed them on her dresser where the morning light would catch them, not as trophies, not as ghosts, but as reminders that scars could become something more than pain. For years she had believed her silence protected her. Now she understood. Sometimes the silence keeps you prisoner. Sometimes the only way to heal is to let the world hear you. Why did the air feel heavier when she walked into the auditorium that morning? The hospital's main hall had been transformed. Flags lined the stage. Rows of chairs stretched to the back wall. Local press mingled with hospital staff and veterans, cameras perched on tripods. At the podium, the banner read, "Military to Medical Bridge Initiative, First National Expansion." Sarah stood behind the curtain, her white lab coat pressed crisp, her hands sliding into the familiar pockets. But today, the weight inside wasn't charts or pens. It was 5 ribbons of purple and silver, pinned to her chest for the first time in years. She had argued with herself for hours that morning. The medals had sat on her dresser, catching the light, daring her to choose. Part of her wanted to leave them where they'd been hidden for so long. But another part, the one Jake had quietly awakened in her, whispered that it was time. So she pinned them, not as proof of pride, not as decoration, but as truth. When she stepped onto the stage, the murmurs began. The shine of her medals caught the light and the audience shifted, some with awe, some with discomfort, some with tears. She gripped the podium. Her voice, when it came, was steady. "I kept these hidden for years, locked in a box. I thought they meant weakness, that every ribbon was a reminder of failure, of moments when I couldn't walk away unscathed. I told myself they were scars, not honors." Her hand brushed the medals lightly. "But scars tell stories, and if I've learned anything, it's that stories matter, not because they glorify the past, but because they remind us what's possible in the present." She glanced at the rows of veterans, their uniforms neat, their eyes carrying the same weight hers did. "These don't make me special. They make me accountable. To live in a way that honors the people who didn't make it home. To use what I learned, the pain and the resilience, to help others heal." Her voice broke just slightly. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from hiding. It comes from standing in the open with all your scars and saying, I'm still here, and so are you. The applause thundered, rising like a tide. But Sarah stood still, her breath uneven, her hand resting against her chest as if to steady herself. She hadn't expected the sound to feel like this, not overwhelming but humbling, not spotlight but solidarity. Afterward, as the crowd filtered out, she was surrounded. Veterans clasped her hands with silent gratitude. Families thanked her for giving their loved ones a chance. Reporters asked for quotes she refused to give. She wasn't here to be a headline. But it was Jake's quiet presence that steadied her most. He had slipped in near the back, standing tall now, his own scars less raw. When the others left, he stepped forward, his gaze dropping briefly to the medals before rising to her eyes. "You finally did it," he said softly. "I finally stopped hiding," she admitted. He nodded, emotion flickering in his expression. "You don't know how much that means. To me, to everyone who's ever come home and thought they had to pretend." Her throat tightened. "I'm not pretending anymore." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't heavy now. It was full. Back at the hospital, life adjusted again. Patients whispered with pride when she entered their rooms. Younger nurses looked at her with something close to reverence. Even the doctors, once skeptical of the rookie, now leaned on her presence during the hardest cases. But not all reactions were easy. One afternoon, Jennifer found her in the break room, fiddling nervously with her coffee. "Sarah," she blurted, "can I be honest? When I see those medals, I don't know what to say. I feel like, I don't know, like I can't measure up. Like whatever I do here will never compare to what you've already done." Sarah studied her carefully. "Jennifer, this isn't a competition. Those medals don't make me more than you. They just make me me. And what you do here every single day matters. A patient doesn't care about medals. They care that someone's holding their hand when they're afraid. You do that, don't diminish it." Jennifer's eyes brimmed. "I guess I never thought about it that way." Sarah smiled softly. "You don't have to be me, you just have to be you. That's enough." Later, as she walked the halls, she felt the subtle shift. Not everyone knew how to approach her now. Some looked at her with awe that built a wall, others with a hesitation that stung. It was the same paradox she had faced her whole career. To be seen meant to be set apart. But this time she carried the weight differently. She let it press against her without crushing her. Because she knew the truth, the medals weren't about her. They were about the people she carried, the lessons she refused to bury. Still at night the memories came. The sounds, the faces, the weight of what was lost. She would sit at her kitchen table, staring at the medals, whispering names only she remembered. Healing was not a straight line. It never would be. But now, when she looked at the medals, she didn't just see failure. She saw choice. She saw survival. She saw the quiet dignity of still standing. One evening, after a long shift, she walked past the cardiac unit. The lights were low, monitors blinking softly, the steady rhythm of healing all around her. She paused at the doorway, watching the nurses make their rounds, patients resting, life moving forward. This was her battlefield now. Different sounds, different scars, but the same mission: keep them alive, hold the line, be steady when others couldn't. And for the first time, she didn't feel divided between who she had been and who she was now. She was both, a medic, a nurse, a veteran, a healer. Not fragments, whole. As she stepped into the hallway again, she whispered a truth she hadn't been able to speak until now. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in hiding your scars. It's in showing them, so others know they can survive too. And she walked on, the medals catching the light with every step, not as weight but as witness. Why did the hospital feel different tonight? The halls were the same. The monitors hummed. Nurses' shoes squeaked on the polished tile. Families whispered in waiting rooms, clinging to hope. But as Sarah walked the corridors, medals resting against her chest, there was a stillness inside her she had never known before. She passed a patient's room, a young woman clutching her husband's hand, fear in her eyes. Sarah stepped in, her voice calm. "You're in the right place. We'll take care of you." She passed another, an older man, frail and restless. She adjusted his blanket, whispered reassurance, watched his shoulders ease. Small things, quiet things, yet she knew now that they mattered, maybe more than the firefights, maybe more than the missions. Healing was never about glory, it was about presence. Later in the staff lounge, Maria found her staring out the window at the city lights. "You've changed, Sarah," she said softly. Sarah smiled faintly. "I think I've just stopped running." "From what?" Sarah thought about it. The medals, the memories, the silence, herself. "From everything," she whispered. Maria touched her arm. "Whatever you were running from, I think you've turned it into something that runs to others now." The words sank deep. Sarah didn't reply, but she carried them with her through the night. Weeks turned to months, and the bridge program grew. More hospitals signed on. More veterans walked across stages with certifications in hand, their eyes filled with a hope Sarah once thought impossible. She traveled often now, speaking at conferences, mentoring new cohorts, sharing her story. Each time she stood before a crowd, she felt the same knot in her chest, not fear but reverence. A reminder that every word carried weight. But she always came back to St. Mary's, back to the cardiac floor, where the hum of monitors and the steady rhythm of care grounded her. This was where she belonged, not only in front of crowds, not only in policy meetings, but at the bedside where healing began, one patient, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. One night after another long shift, Jake met her outside the hospital. His limp had grown lighter, his recovery stronger. He leaned against the railing, watching her approach. "You know," he said quietly, "when I first met you, I thought you were a mystery I'd never figure out. Silent, guarded, untouchable. But now," he trailed off, smiling faintly, "now I see you for what you are." Sarah raised a brow. "And what's that?" "A survivor who decided surviving wasn't enough. You're more than your scars. You're what comes after." Her throat tightened, but she managed a small smile. "You sound wiser than you used to." "You sound lighter than you used to," he replied. They stood in silence, the city hum around them, both knowing their journeys had intertwined in ways neither could have planned. That night Sarah returned home, the medals still pinned to her coat. She placed them carefully on her dresser, where the moonlight caught them. She no longer saw them as reminders of pain. She saw them as proof of life, proof of choices made when there was no other option, proof that even broken bodies could carry unbroken resolve. She sat at her table, a notebook open, pen in hand. For the first time she began to write, not after-action reports, not sterile documentation, but her story, in her own words, for those who might one day need to read it to know they weren't alone. The words came haltingly at first, then smoother, each sentence another release, each page another step toward healing. When she closed the notebook, she whispered to the empty room, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." And she knew that was enough. The next morning she pinned the medals to her coat again. She would wear them not every day, but on the days that mattered, not for recognition, not for applause, but as a reminder to herself, to her patients, to anyone who looked too quickly and dismissed her as just a nurse. Because she was never just anything. She was all of it, a medic, a nurse, a survivor, a bridge. Walking through the hospital doors, she felt the rhythm of life begin again. Patients waiting, colleagues rushing, families hopping. And in the middle of it all, Sarah Martinez, steady, scarred, but unbroken. Not a legend, not a myth. Just a woman who had carried 5 Purple Hearts with quiet pride. And in the end, that was enough.